If you say, well, science hasn't found it yet. Science hasn't found any evidence for the existence of God. Well, is science interested in the question to begin with? Science is not prepared to ask this question. Science looks for where it lost the ring under the street light because that's the only place that it has any light. There's a number of things that science doesn't know. If you read some literature, I enjoy popular science literature, and I read such books and magazines. Among the questions that science doesn't know is, for example, some very basic questions. How does a candle work? Nobody knows. There are literally tens of thousands of chemical reactions involved in how does alcohol work on the brain exactly? Nobody knows exactly. No one can explain the exact mechanism by how it works. Why does a shower curtain, when you're in the shower, tend to glide over towards the stream of water that's coming down? Nobody knows this either. What gives matter its most basic property, mass, as we mentioned? Nobody knows this. The scientists don't know this. You know. And how does gravity work? They don't know this either. Taxonomy, the classification of plants and animals. About at a optimistic estimate, between 5 and 10% of the life forms on the planet have been named, i.e. discovered. We don't know most of the things that are on even the planet Earth. And so why this tremendous epistemological optimism, if not hubris, it's more like arrogance, that science has discovered everything and that what science has not discovered doesn't exist. The shower curtain obviously exists despite the scientists and these other things. And so this is an unreasonable demand or it's an unreasonable premise. It's just what science hasn't discovered isn't worth knowing. The Big Bang, before which there was nothing. They said, well, there was a few things that were before it, but what was before them? If it was contingent, then did things have an origin, and from whence did they come? These things are not, so they're not cut and dried things. So it turns out about 85, much of the biomass on the planet, I believe it's about 85% of the biomass on the planet. In other words, if you piled all the plants and animals on top of each other, on the face of the earth, and is in fact microorganisms that exist under the surface of the earth. Some of them extremely far down. Some of them don't breathe oxygen. Some of them are not carbon-based organisms. They're boron-based organisms. Some survive on hydrogen. They don't breathe oxygen at all. Completely weird life forms that nobody had. And if you took all of these out of the earth, according to the present presumption about how many of them there are, they would equal a pile of organic matter that was about 5 feet tall, spread over all of the Earth's surface. It's a huge amount of it. No one even had the faintest clue that they existed before the 1980s. And so the presumption that science is the default knowledge, and that what science hasn't discovered there's no presumption for it to exist, it's not borne out by the history of scientific discovery. And so why should we presume it? And so this is one point about faith and about all I accept is the facts. Well, what are the facts? And how come you walk into buildings? How come if you hear of a piece of information from 3 people on the street, if you heard 3 people say at different parts of the town, for example, the vice president has been shot, you would believe it. You heard it from this person, you heard it from another person, you hear it from the 3rd person. It's finished. It's a fact as far as you're concerned. So similarly, there are influential interpretations of the way that the world works, and they change. Science changes. New discoveries will be revising, probably fairly radically, our conception of the cosmos. So religion is also an explanation of why things happen. It's a teleological explanation. It doesn't go from one cause and then the other thing is caused out of it, and therefore it caused the third thing, which begs the question as to the origin of things. Where did it begin? Where did it begin? And so why should the most interesting event of all, if you take a purely scientific causative explanation of things, why should the most interesting event of all, the Big Bang or its father, have no causal explanation at all? The big exception. And if it doesn't, if it does have a cause, there's a regress there. So we have to explain it. And if it doesn't have a cause, then why should it be the exception to the rule that you've made that everything has to have a cause to explain it? Whereas the religion explains things in terms of they exist because they point towards some goal, they point towards something. Martin Rees, the astronomer royal in Cambridge, has written his book, just 6 numbers, in which he establishes that there are certain ratios, the ratios of hydrogen, the squares, these basic relations of matter. There are 6 ratios that exist, that if they didn't exist, the universe could not exist, could not be as we know it, could not exist at all, as a matter of fact. And the chances of these 6 numbers coming about in confluence together is impossibly remote. It's one person, another physicist expressed it, says the possibility of the world assembling itself, that these 6 numbers should come together in exactly these ratios. It's about like the possibility of a tornado hitting a junkyard and assembling a Boeing 747. I mean, things show us a fantastic complexity and a fantastic design, and a design argues for a designer.